At 78 years old, Sam Heirs had faced landmines in Vietnam, nights in field hospitals, and years of quiet recovery with the help of a prosthetic leg. But nothing prepared him for the sting of being publicly humiliated over a simple cup of coffee. The morning had started like any other. Sam, dressed in his usual khaki trousers and veteran ball cap, visited his favorite neighborhood cafe for his daily brew. It was his routine, a treasured part of his quiet, disciplined life. Yet on that day, a careless step and an impatient young barista turned that moment of peace into a scene of embarrassment. Sam had merely stumbled. The barista, Leo, young, brash, and more interested in his phone than his surroundings, stepped backward and unintentionally caused Sam to lose balance. His coffee slipped from his hand, splashing onto the cafe floor. Instead of offering assistance or even a kind word, Leo snapped, "Watch it, old man," before yanking the cup from Sam's hand and slamming it on the counter. The liquid spilled further, and so did Sam's dignity. The room fell silent as other customers looked on, some smirking, others avoiding eye contact. Sam stood there, flustered, trying to apologize, even though the fault wasn't his. Leo's glare remained fixed on him, muttering under his breath about clumsy people and cleaning up other people's messes. Not once did he ask if Sam was all right. Not once did he recognize the man's age, his disability, or his service. With trembling hands, Sam reached for a handful of napkins, attempting to clean up the spill alone. No one moved to help. No one intervened. The silence spoke volumes. A veteran who had sacrificed a limb for his country was now being treated as an inconvenience. And as he bent down awkwardly, struggling to balance on his prosthetic, what hurt more than the coffee on the floor was the utter lack of respect in the room. Sam had faced enemies in war, but nothing stung like the disregard of his own people. Sam Heirs had spent a lifetime carrying himself with quiet dignity. At 78, the Vietnam veteran had long ago adjusted to the limitations of his prosthetic leg and learned to move at a slower pace, never asking for pity or favors. Each morning, like clockwork, he visited the Daily Grind, a trendy coffee shop near his apartment, not for the ambiance, but for a good cup of dark roast and a brief moment of peace. He never expected that a simple misstep would strip him of his dignity in front of a room full of strangers. That morning, as he turned from the counter with his hot coffee in hand, the young barista Leo moved quickly behind him to grab a carton of milk without checking his surroundings. The two collided. Sam's balance, already fragile because of his prosthetic, gave way, and his coffee spilled onto the floor. But what followed wasn't an apology. It wasn't concern. It was a verbal assault that echoed through the cafe. "Hey, watch where you're going, old man," Leo snapped, as if Sam had intentionally made a mess. The scalding coffee splashed across the polished floor, narrowly missing Leo, who recoiled more in disgust than shock. Without missing a beat, he snatched the cup from Sam's trembling hand and slammed it onto the counter, more coffee sloshing over the rim. "Clumsy oaf," he muttered, loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. Sam froze, startled by the sudden aggression. He began to stammer an apology, his cheeks burning, but Leo cut him off with a loud, "Are you blind or just clumsy?" Customers turned to look. A few shook their heads. Others watched with mild amusement. No one said a word. The humiliation washed over Sam like a cold tide. He hadn't just spilled coffee, he had become a spectacle. A man who had once navigated jungle warfare and lived through enemy ambushes now stood helpless in a coffee shop, being chastised like a misbehaving child. Trying to salvage the moment, Sam grabbed a few napkins and knelt awkwardly to clean up the spill. His prosthetic made the movement slow and painful. The wet floor sign Leo plopped down beside him was more of a warning to others than a courtesy to Sam. Still, Sam continued to wipe the floor, his back aching and his hands shaking. He wanted to disappear. He wanted the ground to swallow him up so he wouldn't have to see the disapproving glances or hear the murmurs that made him feel more like a burden than a customer. Leo returned to wiping down an already clean espresso machine, casting glances of irritation at Sam while ignoring the mess at his feet. No offer of help, no ounce of compassion, just scorn. Sam, too proud to abandon responsibility for the accident, even if it wasn't his fault, kept working to clean the floor, his breath shallow, his eyes moist from more than just exertion. He thought about walking out, but he couldn't bear the idea of leaving that mess behind or being accused of doing so. And so he stayed, humiliated, on his knees in front of a counter he had stood before many times, treated with far more kindness on other days by different baristas. But today, everything felt different. The sting wasn't from the hot coffee or the ache in his joints. It came from being stripped of his humanity by someone too young to understand what respect meant, and from the silence of onlookers who chose not to intervene. It wasn't just about spilled coffee. It was about a veteran being reduced to a punchline in a public place where he had simply hoped to enjoy a peaceful morning. That moment would soon be interrupted, unbeknownst to Leo, by someone who would not let it pass. Someone who knew exactly what Sam had endured and what it meant to wear the uniform. But for now, Sam was alone in the shame of a public scene that never should have happened, quietly wiping coffee from the floor while the world looked on and said nothing. As Samuel Heirs continued dabbing the spilled coffee with flimsy napkins, his hands trembling and his prosthetic leg making every movement painful, the last thing he expected was for help to come not from the barista who caused the mess, nor from the silent onlookers, but from the very person he had been waiting to meet. The bell over the coffee shop door jingled softly, and in walked a tall young man dressed in the pristine white service uniform of a United States Navy petty officer first class. The air shifted, conversations paused, heads turned. But Michael Heirs wasn't there for attention. He was there for his father. Michael's eyes scanned the cafe quickly. His gaze settled on the hunched figure near the counter, struggling with napkins and humiliation. The sight of his father, bent over trying to clean a mess that wasn't his fault, made his jaw tighten and his posture straighten even more. In just a few seconds, he took in everything. The puddle of coffee, the glaring barista, the wet floor sign dropped like a punishment, and his proud father humiliated in public. Striding purposefully across the cafe, Michael reached Sam and immediately knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Dad, what happened here? Are you okay?" Sam looked up, startled and relieved at once. "Michael, I just spilled some coffee. Clumsy of me." But Michael knew better. He knew his father's quiet nature and how hard it was for him to admit when he'd been wronged. He also knew what the signs of embarrassment and pain looked like on the face of a man who had endured war and loss, but never complained. Helping his father to his feet, Michael turned his sharp gaze to the barista. Leo, once so quick with insults, now stood frozen behind the counter, eyes flicking nervously to the uniformed man walking his way. Michael's presence seemed to draw every eye in the cafe. Not because of his rank or his voice, he hadn't raised it, but because of the sheer gravity of his posture and the steel in his expression. "I'm Petty Officer Heirs," he said evenly, standing tall at the counter. "This gentleman is my father, Sergeant Samuel Heirs, U.S. Army, retired. He tells me there was an accident with his coffee." Leo fumbled for words, trying to maintain the casual arrogance he had displayed minutes earlier. Yeah, he stumbled and spilled it all over. Made a huge mess." Michael didn't blink. "Did he stumble?" he said slowly. "Or did you back into him without looking, causing him to lose balance, and then berate him in front of a room full of strangers, instead of offering help?" The cafe fell silent. Several customers, previously passive observers, began to nod subtly, validating Michael's version. Leo's facade cracked. His bluster faded. He was in the way," he mumbled. "In the way of common decency, maybe," Michael replied coldly. "That man lost his leg in combat defending the rights you take for granted, and instead of respect, you gave him ridicule and public shame. That's not just bad service. That's disgraceful." Even without shouting, Michael's words carried the weight of discipline and truth. The silence in the shop was now loaded with judgment, not for Sam, but for Leo, who was shrinking beneath the uniform stare. No one interrupted, not even the other staff, who quietly retreated to safer corners of the cafe. The manager finally appeared, drawn by the tension. Seeing the scene, the uniform, and her cowering employee, she immediately asked, "Is there a problem, Petty Officer?" Michael answered firmly but calmly, "Yes, ma'am, there is. Your employee verbally humiliated my father, a disabled veteran, after being partially responsible for an accident. He offered no help, no apology, only mockery." The manager's face turned pale. She looked at Leo, then back at Michael. "We'll handle it immediately." Michael didn't want drama. He didn't want a refund or attention. He just wanted respect for his father and for every veteran who quietly bears the weight of service. In that moment, standing tall in his white uniform beside the man who raised him, Michael had already won something greater than an apology. He restored the dignity that should never have been taken away. The tension in the daily grind hadn't yet settled when the store manager, drawn by the silence and sensing something serious, emerged from the back. Her eyes locked on the uniformed Navy petty officer standing at the counter and the distressed older man nearby. "Is there a problem here, petty officer?" she asked, trying to sound composed. Michael Heirs turned toward her, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Yes, ma'am, there is. Your employee Leo just humiliated my father. Sergeant Samuel Heirs, U.S. Army, retired. After carelessly stepping back into him, causing a spill, Leo chose to berate him in public, snatched the cup from his hand, and let him clean the mess on the floor with napkins while he stood by doing nothing. This wasn't just a lapse in customer service. It was a blatant show of disrespect toward an elderly disabled veteran." The manager's face drained of color. She turned to Leo, who now looked visibly shaken and unsure of himself. "Leo, is this true?" she asked, her tone sharp. Leo mumbled a few incoherent words, clearly realizing he was now in serious trouble. Michael continued without raising his voice, the authority in his presence speaking louder than volume ever could. "I want two things. First, a sincere apology from Leo to my father. Second, I want to know exactly what steps this business will take to make sure no other veteran or any elderly or disabled person goes through what my father just experienced." There was no mistaking the weight of Michael's words. Every customer in the shop was watching now, many nodding in agreement. The room that once ignored Sam's humiliation now stood behind him, united in silent condemnation. The manager, realizing the gravity of the moment, quickly responded. "Petty Officer Heirs, please accept my deepest apologies on behalf of the daily grind. What you've described is completely unacceptable. Leo," she said, turning to the cowering barista, "apologize, now." Leo, pale and visibly shaken, walked slowly to where Sam stood beside his son. "Mr. Heirs, I'm sorry for how I treated you," he stammered. "It was wrong." Sam gave a slight nod, his face unreadable. The apology, though overdue and forced, was something, but Michael wasn't finished. "Ma'am," he said, turning again to the manager, "this isn't just about one apology. It's about how this shop operates and how it respects its patrons. You see, I'm attached to the Public Affairs Office at Naval Base Kitsap. I also happen to write stories for Navy publications and maintain a fairly large following online, especially among service members and their families, and I had arranged to meet my father here for coffee." He paused briefly, letting that sink in. Now, if that meeting turns into a story about how a decorated Vietnam veteran was mocked and made to clean his own spilled drink while no one intervened, I think a lot of people would want to hear about it. "Shitato." The manager's face went pale. She clearly understood the weight of public opinion, especially when amplified through the military community. No, petty officer," she said quickly, her voice trembling slightly. "That won't be necessary. We value all our customers, especially veterans. Effective immediately, we will initiate a mandatory staff retraining program on customer service, disability awareness, and veteran sensitivity. In addition, we would like to offer your father complimentary coffee for life and make a donation in his name to a local veterans charity of your family's choosing." Michael considered the offer. The donation is a good start. The training is essential. As for the coffee, he said, turning to his father with a small smile, "I think he'll decide where he wants to have his coffee from now on." Sam, finally letting a small smile crack through his weariness, nodded. "Let's go, son," he said. "I know a place that still remembers what respect looks like." "So, Messias." The two men turned and walked out, leaving behind a barista humbled, a manager scrambling, and a coffee shop full of people who had just learned what honor, dignity, and justice look like, delivered not with shouting or threats, but with integrity, truth, and a uniform that still carried weight. In the days that followed the incident, the daily grind saw a quiet but powerful transformation. Leo was reassigned indefinitely, and every employee at the cafe underwent mandatory retraining focused on disability awareness and veteran respect. A new sign was placed by the entrance: "We honor those who've served." But more importantly, a deeper lesson lingered in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the event. Respect is not just a word, it's an action, a choice, and sometimes a quiet stand taken by someone in uniform for someone who no longer wears one. Petty Officer Michael Heirs didn't need to raise his voice or demand vengeance. His strength came from love, truth, and honor, values passed down from the very man who had just been humiliated. Sam never returned to that cafe, but his story traveled farther than he ever imagined. It served as a powerful reminder that dignity should never be optional, and that sometimes the greatest defense of honor comes not from generals, but from children standing up for their parents. If this story moved you, leave a comment below about someone you'd stand up for. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about courage, respect, and justice. Together, let's make sure no veteran ever has to fight alone, not even for a cup of coffee.